everyone, thanks for visiting my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Carol. I'm glad that you stopped by and I hope that you will consider subscribing. So it's been a while since I've uploaded a video. This year has been really hard. Some of you know I've been going through some personal things that I've had to deal with, so I've had to step away from the camera to do so. Had a lot of life changes and a lot going on. Not going to go into all the details, but you will notice my background is different and there are just some different things going on. But anyway, I am back. I know I've had a number of you message me concerned about me coming back and continuing my channel. I am coming back. I am continuing my channel. I just adore all of you. I thank you so much for your patience. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your kind words and your faithfulness to my channel. So thank you so much. It means the world to me. So anyway, we're going to get back into the groove. You guys love canning. So today's video is just going to be a Q&A about canning, and it's going to be about things that I get asked very frequently. For those of you who are seasoned canners, this may not be a lot of interest to you. It may not be any new information, but for those of you who are newer to canning, it may help alleviate some of your fears and make you feel a little more confident when you do can. So the first thing I want to talk about is a big topic. It is siphoning or liquid loss from your jars. I get questioned about this on a regular basis, and it is a legitimate concern, and there are some things that you need to know about siphoning. Now, siphoning just refers to liquid loss from your jar. So you can tell from this jar of potatoes that my liquid level is here. My potatoes are up a little bit higher than that. This is still shelf stable and still safe to consume. As long as you have as long as your jar is half filled with your liquid, so that would be up to here, what is inside is still safe to store and to consume. Just to know that anything above the liquid line will start to darken. So any jars where you've had a significant amount of liquid loss, you want to make sure you consume those sooner rather than later, because the product above the jar will start to darken. It's still safe to consume. It just doesn't look pretty on your shelf, and it doesn't look pretty when you go to eat it. So just know that it's safe. You want to make sure that you've not lost more than half of the liquid in your jars. If more than half of the liquid in your jars has siphoned, then you need to refrigerate the contents of your jar and consume it within 2 or 3 days of canning it. Just know that that does happen. There are some things that you can do to help minimize siphoning, but sometimes you can do everything right and things can still siphon. Anything with sugar syrup is notorious for siphoning. The things that you can do to help alleviate it is to make sure you're using the proper headspace for whatever product it is you are canning. Try to eliminate as much as possible any temperature fluctuations during the canning process. Make sure you debubble. Debubble just refers to releasing air bubbles before you put your lid in your ring on your jars and start the canning process, which leads me to the last thing, which is make sure that you just make your rings fingertip tight or finger tight, which just means to tighten the ring just until you start to feel some resistance. So you don't want to over tighten, you don't want to under tighten, just till you start to feel some resistance. Those things can help eliminate some siphoning, but like I said, you can do everything right and still have problems with siphoning. There are some things that tend to siphon worse than others, so just know as long as you have not lost half of the liquid in your jars, you are good to go. So the next thing I want to talk about is converting recipes. I get a ton of questions or people sending me recipes and that they make like a batch of soup or whatever that they make that's not a canning recipe, and they'll say, can you tell me if this is safe for canning? I cannot tell you that it is safe for canning. I can tell you that what ingredients are safe for canning, but I can't tell you that a particular recipe is safe for canning. It's best to always use a tested recipe. And now, with that being said, there are some safe changes that I do to some recipes. Things that I know are safe to do, I will change out, but as far as taking a recipe that I would just make on the stove and eat that day, like grandma's favorite soup recipe, I cannot tell you that that is safe to do. I can, however, tell you and point you in the direction of a method that the National Center for Home Food Preservation has on their website, and I also have demonstrated it in one of my videos, and I will link both in the description box below for you, and that is can your own soup. They do describe a method in the National Center of Home Food Preservation's website, they do describe a method of how you can safely take a recipe that is your favorite soup and convert it and prep it and process it properly so that it is shelf stable. With that being said, it is really important for you to know things that are not safe for canning. And I will link an article for you that talks about things that are safe for canning and things that are not safe for canning. Dairy for sure, noodles, rice, pasta, anything like that is not safe for canning. Cured meats are not safe for canning, with the exception of tested recipes. Ball has a bean and ham recipe that has been tested. They do put ham in that recipe, so I would consider that a safe recipe. It was tested, and they did use ham, which is a cured meat, so I'm comfortable with using that recipe. But as far as adding cured meats, we're warned against doing that. It is not a safe practice. The National Center of Home Food Preservation does allow for adding a small piece of bacon in your baked beans. So sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. So that's up to you, but by and large, it is not safe to add cured meats. Again, I will leave an article that lists the whole gamut of things that are not safe for canning so that you can be aware of that. It's important to know. Another question I get asked frequently is, how long can I keep my canned goods? If you use Ball or Kerr lids, they do state that they stand by their seals for about 18 months. I do keep my canned goods for about 3 years. As long as your seal is intact and what you've canned has been processed properly, it is safe to consume as long as the seal is intact. However, like even commercial canned goods, they do give you a best by date. That's because the quality starts to deteriorate after a period of time. It's not necessarily a safety issue, it becomes more of a quality issue as long as it's been canned properly and stored properly. Another question I get frequently is about potatoes. When I can potatoes and I say white potatoes, there are potatoes that are actually labeled and considered a white potato. It is a waxy potato, and that is what is recommended for canning. However, that being said, you can can russets. White potatoes are not russets. Russets are a starchy potato. Again, white potatoes are a waxy potato. You can can red potatoes, you can can yellow potatoes, you can can just about any potato. It's just that the starch content is different in the different varieties of potatoes. So just know that if you do canned russets, and there are people who do a soaking and rinsing method before they can them up to alleviate some of the starch. If you can a waxy potato, you will have a lot less starch in your jar. However, you still will see some. This is a jar of my herbed potatoes. I do have a recipe on these, and you can still see a little bit of starch at the bottom. These are white potatoes, but there's still a little bit of starch. If these would have been russets, you would see a lot more starch and your liquid would be a lot more cloudy looking. Another question I get a lot is about headspace. Headspace refers to the space between the bottom of the lid and the top of your product. So make sure whatever you are canning, you know what the appropriate headspace is for that product. Most things that you pressure can are going to be around an inch. Jams and jellies are 1/4 of an inch. Fruits are typically 1/2 an inch, but just make sure you consider the guidelines and know what the correct headspace is for the product that you are canning. Another question that I get a lot about is about beans, and I have a video on canning beans that talks about all the ins and outs of canning beans. Most of the time, people's concern with canning beans is they are not very liquidy once you can them. They seem to absorb the liquid that's in the jar. This is a jar of baked beans. They are notorious for absorbing their sauce. So my solution to that is to just use fewer beans in your jar, especially with baked beans. You're using a sauce which is a little bit thicker than canning with water or stock. And beans, depending on their age and how you soaked them, they can really absorb the liquid that they are in. So for baked beans or any type of bean that you're canning that is canned with a sauce, I recommend only going just a little over half, filling your jar just a little over half with beans, and then topping off with your liquid or your sauce. For beans that are just canned in water or stock, you can go to 2/3 to 3/4 filling your jar with beans, and then top it off with your water or your stock to the 1-inch headspace. The guidelines state when you're canning beans that to fill your jars to 1-inch headspace with beans and your liquid. That's almost too much in my opinion. They get really starchy after they sit, and sometimes after canning. You can see these are my chipotle black beans, and even though there's plenty of liquid in there, you can see that it is really starchy looking. And it's just the variety of bean, what they're canned in, whether it's stock or water or a sauce, all of those, and how old the beans are, all of those things play a factor in how thick the liquid gets once you've canned it. So my solution across the board is to just put in fewer dried beans that are properly prepped, which is a whole other topic. Just put less of them in your jar and then top off with your liquid, whatever that may be. Another topic that's important, and we're kind of getting past this since we're getting past the gardening season, lots of people were canning up tomatoes and had the question about acidifying. Safe canning guidelines state that even if you are pressure canning tomatoes, you need to acidify them. Many people don't agree with that and don't follow that guideline, but I do. So just make sure that if you want to be on the safe side, even when you're pressure canning tomatoes, it is proper practice to acidify them. I'm reading to you straight from the National Center of Home Food Preservation. Acidification. To ensure safe acidity in whole crushed or juiced tomatoes, add 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice or 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid per quart of tomatoes. For pines, use 1 tablespoon of lemon juice or 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid. If a procedure from the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning for Canning Tomatoes offers both boiling water and pressure canning options, all steps in the preparation are still required, even if the pressure processing option is chosen. So it doesn't make any difference if you're water bath or steam or pressure canning, you must acidify your tomatoes to ensure the safety of your product. Speaking of tomatoes, there is no safe canning guideline for canning diced tomatoes. We've had this discussion a lot in my canning group on Facebook. The only safe guidelines given are for whole or crushed tomatoes. We do not have safe canning guidelines for tomatoes that have been diced. That being said, I think that there are some tested recipes for soups and things like that do allow for diced tomatoes to be used, but there is no safe canning guideline for just jarring up diced tomatoes. So we're not going to argue that here or in my Facebook group. We're going to follow safe canning guidelines. Stacking your jars during storage is another topic that comes up frequently. There are different schools of thought on that. Even the experts don't completely agree. It is safe to stack your jars. Ball is even selling jars that are quote unquote stacking jars. So it is safe to stack them. Some of the experts say you should put a piece of cardboard or something in between your layers to distribute the weight evenly to keep from disturbing the seals on the lower jars. There are other experts who don't think that that's necessary. So it's entirely up to you how you want to stack your jars, but it is safe. I don't recommend stacking them very high. Most of the people that I know that do stack them with a cardboard or something in between, again, to distribute the weight more evenly and make them a little more stable. But there are experts who say you don't even need to do that. So, and I will leave an article discussing that whole topic, and you can read it in detail for yourself in the description box below. Another question I get asked frequently is about the Presto canner versus the All-American canner. For those of you who have followed my channel very long, you know that I use an All-American canner. So when I'm just demonstrating how the canning process, I'm always referring to how the All-American canner works. The All-American canner is considered a weighted gauge canner, and it is to be used as such. There is a dial gauge canner that tells you the PSI on the dial, in which case you would follow that, but the All-American is a weighted gauge canner, so you always go by the rocking when you are using that canner. With the All-American canner, your weight should rock 1 to 3 times every minute. For the Presto canner, it's a weighted gauge canner, but it also rocks differently. The Presto canner is supposed to rock continuously, not too fast, not too slow, but just a nice steady pace. So they are different. I do not use a Presto canner, so I don't demonstrate that. So just be aware, whatever canner you're using, whatever manufacturer your canner was made by, make sure you read the instruction booklet that comes with your canner and follow the instructions and the guidelines that they put in their instruction book. The All-American canner is a dual gauge canner. It does have the dial gauge and it also has the weight, but again, it is a weighted gauge canner, so the dial is just for reference only. If your rocking does not match the PSI on the gauge, you can replace your gauge, but again, that is only just for reference. You don't use the gauge to make sure you're processing properly. If the weight on your canner, your All-American canner, is not rocking, but you are at the correct PSI, do not start timing until the weight starts rocking. The weight supersedes the dial. So just know that and be aware of it. It's really important because I've had people contact me and say, my weight's not rocking, but I'm at the right PSI, should I start timing? And the answer to that is no. You should always go by the rocking with an All-American canner. And again, you can contact All-American and it's easy to replace that dial gauge if it's not working properly. It just screws off and you can buy a new one. And I have done that and it works fantastically. Also, if you are using a dial gauge canner, you need to make sure that you are having the dial checked every year before you start canning, just to make sure that your gauge is working properly so that your food is processed properly. So that's it for today's Q&A, you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Thank you for your patience and waiting for a new video. I promise you I have more content coming. I'm actually going to spend some time brainstorming today and put together some ideas and some fun videos for you guys. We do have the holidays coming up, which is always one of my favorite times to do canning because people love to gift their homemade canned goods. So I'll have some fun recipes coming up for that. So thanks for joining me today. I hope you guys have a fantastic day and I will see you next time.